Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Anushree Singh from Celegence. I would like to welcome you all today to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. We'll give a couple of minutes for people to join in. While we wait, I would like to highlight today's webinar is on clinical evaluation of dental medical devices, lessons learned from notified body assessments. And also note that a copy of the recording will be shared with the registered attendees upon completion of the webinar. There will also be an opportunity to submit questions to our panelists via the Q&A option on your Zoom toolbar, and you can do this anytime during the presentation. I request you all to be as specific as possible when submitting your questions. Right, before I jump onto the presentation mode, I would turn off my video to avoid any technical glitches. Right. We will first begin briefly with an introduction to Celegence. Celegence was formed in 2017 with the intent of improving quality and compliance and reducing costs in the life sciences industry in the areas of regulatory affairs. Today, we serve multiple customers worldwide, ranging from small to large-size companies, including some of these listed on the slide. We're headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, and we have offices present at several locations across the globe, as presented on the slide. We provide niche regulatory services such as MDR and IVDR gap analysis, CR writing, device registration, ECT publishing, as well as other pharmaceutical support as well. We offer several options for operational and strategic support in the area of regulatory affairs for global device compliance. We have extensive experience in EU MDR across a wide range of therapeutic areas, including all dental specialties and others that are listed on the slide. We have worked with several customers on addressing the notified body observations received on their clinical evaluation documents and successfully achieved EU MDR compliance for their documentation. Here at Celegence, we have a global pool of SMEs, including dentists, physicians, PhDs, engineers, regulatory experts, and medical writers. Now, moving to the introduction of the panelists for today's webinar, starting with myself, I'm Dr. Anushree Singh, and I will be the moderator for the session today. I have a doctorate degree in neuro-oncology and master's in biosciences. I have experience working on EU MDR compliant regulatory documents for medical devices across a wide range of therapeutic areas. I work as a team lead here at Celegence and have worked with several manufacturers of medical devices, including dental devices. Joining me in the panel today is Dr. Pratibha Mishra. She has master's degree in oral medicine and maxillofacial radiology. She has experience working on EU MDR compliant regulatory documentation for medical devices across several therapeutic areas. She's a manager and senior SME here at Celegence and has been associated with several projects in providing strategic advice on regulatory strategy. She has successfully completed multiple projects related to addressing notified body observations to ensure EU MDR compliance. Also part of the panel today is Dr. Alpa Ben. She's a dentist and has been associated with the healthcare services industry for over 12 years with experience across multiple domains. She has worked on EU MDR compliant regulatory documents covering a wide range of therapeutic areas. She works as an SME and a clinical reviewer for regulatory documentation at Celegence. The panel today, along with other regulatory experts and medical writers at Celegence, have worked with more than 8 manufacturers of dental devices on their clinical evaluation, devices that include consumable materials, equipments, imaging devices, and software to ensure MDR compliance, as well as in addressing notified body observations. Let's jump to the agenda for the webinar today. We will go through observations from notified bodies related to different aspects of the clinical evaluation plan and report, such as device information and equivalence pathway, clinical benefits and measurable objectives, systematic literature review and state of the art. This will then be followed by risk analysis and post-market clinical follow-up, and finally rounding it with the key takeaways from our webinar today. I do want to mention the best practices that we will discuss in today's webinar are based on non-conformances or requests for additional information received by the manufacturers that we have come across. These may vary depending on observations from different reviewers and notified bodies. The first set of observations that we want to discuss today are related to information in the CR specific to the device and clinical evaluation reports that are based on equivalence pathway. This is a fairly straightforward section in the CR. We know that the document has to include specific information about the device. We have, however, noticed some gaps in the documentation or some observations around completion of information in this section, especially when it's a device that has several accessories or components like software or other compatible devices that are supposed to be used with the device. Let's take an example. If your device is part of an orthodontic treatment kit, you have to include other accessories that are part of the kit. Those have to be mentioned or described in detail. You may cover the safety and performance of those accessories in the same CR, or it could be a separate one which can be referenced in your current CR. But there has to be a mention of what accessories are used with the subject device. Generally, when we have a device that is software component, the details of the software component should not be missed. Details that are expected to be included in the CR include operating system, version history of the software, the hardware that it's compatible with, either a laptop, desktop, or phones has to be mentioned, and the base algorithm on which the software functions also has to be mentioned. So let's take an example. If you have a surgical navigation system for dental implants, then the information related to the software component that facilitates the surgical navigation should be presented in the CR. And I would also like to mention an example when we talk about devices used in conjunction. So if you have a dental composite as your device in the CR, the particular primers and etchants that it is compatible with should be mentioned in the CR. There are clinical evaluation reports being created following the equivalence pathway. We know that under the MDR, in case there is insufficient data for the subject device, there is an option to consider a device that can be demonstrated to be equivalent in the CR, such that the data for the device can be utilized for demonstrating safety and performance. However, the requirements for considering a device to be equivalent are quite stringent under the MDR as compared to what was expected in the MDD days or what is considered equivalent under the FDA. Because of such requirements, we have noticed gaps in equivalence, as well as these being brought up in different CRs. So let's take an example here. If a predecessor or a different device from the same family has been considered as an equivalent device, there should be clear information about the relationship between the two devices. The MDCG 2025 guidance on equivalence is very comprehensive and is a suitable reference for CRs that follow the equivalence pathway. There is also a template present for the equivalence table for what the comparison should look like between the subject device and the device presumed to be equivalent. In situation when there is a gap between the subject and equivalent device, the differences have to be clearly indicated and justified to demonstrate that these differences are not significant enough to impact the safety and performance of the device. Furthermore, we know that there's a requirement in MDR if a device is being used as equivalent. The manufacturer should have complete access to their technical file and also the information related to the device, which is why I think the concept of considering a device from your own product portfolio has almost become non-existent under the MDR. Would you like to bring out some points regarding this? Pratibha, you're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Anushi, I think you meant considering a competitor device as an equivalent, right?
Correct.
I think it is practically quite. We can say that it has become quite impossible now. I mean, it's not practical to assume that you would have access to that kind of information for a device that's not your own device. Um, we have, in our experience, been able to successfully complete clinical evaluation using the equivalence pathway for devices up to the risk class of class 2B non-implantable. For high-risk devices, of course, it's quite difficult to achieve because without access to this kind of information, we can't really fulfill all the requirements from the comparison table that you earlier mentioned from the MDCG guidance. For low-risk devices or fairly simple devices, it's still possible.
Oh, I think we lost her.
Yeah, I believe she has a technical glitch, so she'll be joining back. So in continuation with what Dr. Pratibha was saying, so it is pretty important for us to have an equivalent when considering an equivalent device for the to have an pathway for safety and performance. It's good to have an equivalent device from the same portfolio because EU MDR currently recommends to have contract in place when considering a equivalent device from a different manufacturers. So it's always advisable in case if establishing safety and performance pathway, then having a equivalent device within the same portfolio or within the same generic devices.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alpa. Thank you for pitching in. I think we can go ahead and cover any other aspects we would like to discuss about equivalence further down the line. So moving on in the interest of time. The other aspect of clinical evaluation that we would like to focus on today is clinical benefits and measurable objectives. This is coming up as a gap in almost all observations that we have come across. The main challenge being that if the clinical benefits of the device are not already known and defined, then we have to do so at the time of clinical evaluation. It's a very common observation and is a challenge for us clinical evaluators to address.
Hi, Nishri, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back on.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Do you
No worries.
want to proceed with this and then we can go back and talk about equivalence for a bit?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, so I like this topic better anyway. I think from the clinical benefits perspective, we are noticing this increasingly as one of the gaps being pointed out by the notified body. When we say clinical benefits, what the manufacturers are expected to do is define what the benefit is to the patient if your device successfully achieves its intended performance. So to take an example, if you have a dental imaging device or a dental imaging software, if the device performs well and you get good quality images, the patient would not have to be subjected to repeat imaging, and therefore the radiation exposure would be reduced. So that would be an indirect benefit from your device. That is how you have to define a clinical benefit or more than one for your device, as in terms of what the patient would experience as the end goal. Like it says on the slide here, user satisfaction or the clinician successfully using the device is not being considered as a benefit of the device. The benefit has to be defined in terms of the patient. I think the MDCG 2026 guidance is a good reference for understanding what exactly clinical benefit means for your device. If it's a software device, the 2021 guidance is also a good source of reference. It doesn't end here, actually. The other expectation is that the CER also establishes what are the endpoints that you would consider for describing the safety and performance of your device. So if if we take the example that I mentioned before, a radiation imaging device, the quality of the image, or in a related sense, the contrast of the image or image resolution would be considered as a parameter to define performance that for the device. So that parameter would have to be established, and that is what the performance of the device would be compared against when we look at state-of-the-art data, which of course we'll talk about in subsequent slides. But that is how the notified body reviewers are looking at benefits from your device and what has been defined as a clinical outcome or endpoint against which those benefits could be measured. I think Dr. Alpa would have some more examples from dental devices.
Alpa, you're on mute.
Sorry. So here I agree with it. So any medical devices, they should be associated with clinical benefits. And these clinical benefits should be further associated with endpoints and the acceptance criteria. So say for example, a clinical benefit for a dental restorative material is high longevity and durability, or maybe it has a better marginal adaptation to the tooth, or even it restores aesthetics. So these are the clinical benefits that we are getting from a dental restorative material. But how do we establish this? So we need to use say USPHs or FTI criteria. So these are the couple of criteria that are used to establish the clinical benefits and also derive endpoints and acceptance criteria from this. So hence these criteria scrutinizes the evidence that has to be considered in the clinical evaluation, and it supports the endpoints and the acceptance criteria of the medical device.
Thank you for that, Alpa. Pratibha, would you like to go back in terms of what you were mentioning about equivalence before we jump ahead?
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, I think I was talking about how it is practically difficult anymore to consider a different manufacturer's product and establish equivalence anymore because of the stringent requirements. We have done that for some low-risk devices where it wasn't technologically or biologically very difficult to compare, but it is preferable to have clinical data on your own device from other sources, or consider a product from your own portfolio or predecessor device as an equivalent device.
Thank you for your input. So yes, just going ahead with the next topic. So I also want to bring up the clinical claims that are included in the CER, since we just talked about benefits and objectives. We've seen observations like what you see on the slide here, where the verbiage of claims or the acceptance of the claim statement has been questioned. So these have to be based on measurable data, specific data, which we will talk about when we discuss the state-of-the-art observations. So for example, successful diagnosis of caries, that's a vague claim. Your claim statement should rather read as either accuracy of diagnosis or sensitivity or specificity of the diagnosis. Alba, what do you think about talking when we come to the claim section of this year?
As rightly mentioned, having a claim for the medical device is utmost importance because it talks about the safety and performance parameters. And here it gives a clear vision what is the benefit for the patient, or how a patient will be benefited from the usage of the medical devices. So any safety and performance claims has to be included in the CER, but no marketing claims have to be included. So here when I talk about safety and performance claims, say for example, we are claiming that medical device it reduces the procedure time, or it is better than other competitor device that is available in the market. So this is a clinical claim that is related to the safety and performance. So this claim has to be supported with the clinical evidence.
I think we are having another technical glitch. Pratibha, would you like to mention your input?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Like you rightly said, the claim has to be very specific. The terminology cannot be vague, and if it is a clinical claim, that is what the notified body really cares about. It has to be something related to directly the safety and performance of the device in a clinical setting. If you have a claim like that, then it is expected that the data supporting that claim will also be clinical. For example, if we say something like the device is, twice as better than a competitor, or if the claim is that it reduces the treatment time by half, or improves the implant survival is better by 25% or 30%, that is a very clinical claim. So the data around it also has to be clinical. For claims that are marketing based, that are design related and don't necessarily relate to safety and performance of the device, don't have to be mentioned in the CER. In fact, it's preferable if it's not. There can also be instances where you don't specifically make a claim, a claim that is clinical in nature. Just mention that the only claim made is that the device performs as intended, and then we need to substantiate that that the intended performance is met through clinical data. That's also an option for CERs.
Yeah, I agree. When we do talk about claims, they definitely have to be measurable and specific. So let's, for example, accuracy or retention rate. So there also have to be acceptance values for these that need to be included in this year, where the accuracy would be considered acceptable. So we will discuss this further ahead when we talk about state-of-the-art observations. We've known that the state-of-the-art section is extremely important part of the clinical evaluation. It has been ever since MedDev Ref 4 came into the picture. The observations that we're seeing with state-of-the-art are pointing towards the fact that it's rather descriptive instead of having quantifiable data. There are concepts defined, but no quantifiable parameters that could help determine the benefit-risk ratio of the device. In your opinion, it may seem like the state-of-the-art could be robust and well-written, but we are still seeing observations being brought up. The reason usually is that the expectation from the notified body is that the data should be more quantitative and highlight the safety and performance outcomes from the clinical data. Pratibha, what are your thoughts on state-of-the-art observations?
You don't see the screen, otherwise you would see me smiling. This is very challenging for us, needless to say, but it is also very interesting to understand, to now have fairly good understanding of what the notified bodies expect from this section. We've all known and heard about the importance of state-of-the-art in the CER. What we are seeing is that instead of a narrative review of the background and the conditions and everything else under the sun, what the reviewer wants to see is quantitative evidence that the parameters that have been defined for safety and performance, what is the state of the art in those terms from similar devices or from alternative therapies, and where your device stands in comparison to that. So just to say that in other terms, if going back to the example I used before for a radiation imaging device or a imaging software, if we have defined image quality as a performance parameter, or if for such a device, a safety parameter would be the acceptable radiation exposure, let's say, for an imaging device. So there are national or international standards that define what can be considered as acceptable diagnostic exposure for users and for patients. That would be your acceptance criteria, acceptance value, and you can demonstrate that your device is within those limits. In terms of safety, that data can come from standards, or it could be the clinical practice guidelines that sometimes provide values or the criteria that could be considered as state of the art. Another example here would be if you have a detergent or a surface disinfectant that's used for reprocessing of dental equipment or cleaning surfaces in a dental clinic. The guidelines would provide an acceptance of what is the acceptable microbial count after these products have been used, or what is their performance against, when used as a disinfectant solution or material. And that is the information that you also have to present for your device to show that the performance of your device is comparable. There could be so many other examples of, but basically the idea is in your state-of-the-art section, you should have quantitative data of what is accepted in general for performance and safety of such type of devices. And then also in your CER, present a comparative analysis of how your device performs on those parameters. The most important source of information, or the most common source of information for this for these parameters, is the published data, published literature. We could look at studies where the similar device or technologies have been used, and the average value or the range of values or any other parameter which can determine what is accepted, and compare your device's performance against it in a clinical setting. As I talked about published literature, of course, I also saw what's on the slide, and the only way to present that information in the CR is when you have that information in the first place, and that happens when you have a detailed, comprehensive literature search protocol. I think, Alpa, I know you and I have had a lot of discussion about this, and you have some thoughts on best practices that we follow here of ensuring that we have the relevant data with us.
Yes, so having an acceptance criteria for the clinical benefits. So these can be derived from the published literature databases, but to derive qualitative data from the published literature, we need to have a literature search protocol in place. So say, for example, any literature search protocol, which should have a search strategies or search terms for both DUE and SOTA. So they have to be two different comprehensive literature search protocols, which we cannot club into one single document, but it is a requirement from the notified body to have two protocols or two different search protocols for DUE and state of the art. And to draft these protocols, IMDRF and 2019 guidance and MedDev Ref 4 can be referred, and these are the guidance documents that can help to have a draft the search protocols. In addition to that, the literature search strategies can be drafted using a PICO or Prisma model. So these are the common models that are used to draft the search strings and to pull out a good qualitative data. And also for the protocol, it should specify the elements, the objectives, and the method of identification and selection of the published literature articles. And all the identified literature articles has to be appraised, hence a well appraisal plan and a scientific validity and data contribution parameters has to be determined. This will provide enough clinical evidence to support clinical endpoints of the DUE, and also the search protocol that has been drafted and defined has to be included in the clinical evaluation report, and both the protocols, DUE and state-of-the-art protocols, has to be included in the clinical evaluation.
If I may add here, Anushree, before we go on,
yeah, please.
I think this is one of the easiest observations to avoid or minimize or address in your CRs. The every CR does include a process of literature review. It just has to be done in a systematic way. And for guidance, we look at MDCG 2020-6. We look at MedDev revision 4. We also have the IMDRF 2019 guidance that Alpa mentioned. And when we say a comprehensive protocol, that has to include all the elements: the date of search, the person responsible for the search, the databases that have been searched, a justification of why those databases have been searched, the search strings, the related output, the selection criteria, and specifically why an article was included or excluded, and the appraisal for suitability and contribution and the results of that. And as I say it, obviously it sounds very tedious, and it is a tedious part of our job. It's very manual and mechanical and time consuming, and takes up a majority of time that we have, usually set aside to complete a clinical evaluation report. And we at Celegence have our proprietary technology, the CAPTIS platform, that is actually quite helpful with this entire process, and ensures that we are efficient with the literature review as aspect of the CR, among other benefits that it has. Anushree, maybe you would want to reminisce about the time that we used to do this manually, and how interesting that was.
Actually, I'd rather not talk about those days, wherein we had to do the manual process with multiple Excel sheets and lots of data coming through from the literature review process. So again, thanks to the technology, we have a simpler way of doing so. And I would like to mention here that we recently conducted a time-saving study on CAPTIS versus the manual processes, wherein we saw a nearly 30% reduction in the time taken for the overall literature review process. And here are some of the benefits listed of using the CAPTIS platform, some of which do help us clinical evaluators to conduct the systematic literature review process for DOE as well as state-of-the-art as a separate option. This CAPTIS also allows us to be efficient and consistent in performing the literature review process. It can also serve as a centralized repository for all your data coming through.
Yeah, that sounds about right. The time-saving values that you mentioned. Also, speaking as an SME, what I have liked about this platform that we have is that it ensures that we minimize the risks of errors, of inconsistencies across different documents. And we do have a lot of documents that we have to create and maintain under MDR. And the entire maintenance process becomes, it has definitely become much smoother and easier for us. And I'm, for one, quite grateful that we have this.
Yeah, I'm on the same page here. All right, thank you for that. Moving ahead, the goal of the clinical evaluation process is benefit risk determination. It is to ensure that the risks related to the device are acceptable and that this is important to be presented in the CR. The observations that are related to this aspect have largely been about no alignment between the risks that are identified in your CR versus the risk management documentation versus any other technical documentation. These have to be consistent across all the documents. Alba, I think you may have some inputs to give on this particular aspect of the clinical evaluation.
Yeah, as rightly mentioned, all the identified risk has to be documented in the risk files and also in the IFU and the tech files, and all the latest guide or the ISO standard to be followed for the risk files is 14971 and 2019. So the risk files has to be prepared as per this ISO standard, and also all the risk for the medical devices has to be mitigated and need to be as low as possible. Risk identified from the CER has to be analyzed in detail, and also if any new risk has been identified for the similar devices has to be included in the risk file for TUE, as this again one of the requirement from the notified body, and this risk has to be assessed and a justification has to be provided for the relevancy of this risk. Say for example, the TUE is an orthodontic mini implant, and our similar device, an orthodontic mini implant, it reports some bone resorption or root resorption. Although this risk was not identified for the DUE, but it has to yet be included in the risk file and analyzed and given a justification for the relevancy of this particular risk. Hence, analyzing all the reported risk supports the intended effectiveness of the DUE.
Yeah, I think the risk from similar devices is coming up as an important aspect that the notified body is evaluating for, whether that has been satisfactorily addressed in the clinical evaluation. If such risks are identified, what is the action plan for dealing with those as an output of the clinical evaluation? What are the next steps? There should be recommendations in the CER that the risk management has to be updated, or IFU will need updates, etc. Both other panelists mentioned, the documents have to be aligned in terms of what the risks from your device are. This includes your CERs, the PSURs, PMS plans, even PMCF plans have to document the same risks that are present in the risk management document. How we can go about this in the CER is, if you have a low-risk device or a device that is that has a strong safety profile that is related to relatively low adverse events or safety-related issues, it can be a qualitative discussion in the CER. You may identify and present all the risks identified from different data sources in a tabular format and justify the verbiage in your IFU or the mitigation measures as an output of your risk management process. If there are risks in that list which are not device related, justification can be presented for why and how. However, if these are high-risk devices or devices associated with a relatively higher number of safety incidents, it is expected that the discussion will be more quantitative in nature. For example, if you have a dental implant, the expectation is that your risks identified from device literature or other sources of data, as well as similar devices, there will be an assessment of, let's say, the percentage occurrence rate of these risks and comparison with what is considered as acceptable level of risk in your risk documentation, and whether this percentage or the rates are higher or comparable, or if they are higher, then what are the, like I mentioned before, what are the steps that you as a manufacturer are taking to ensure that the risk level becomes acceptable. That is the kind of assessment that we have noticed coming up as gaps or non-conformances in the CER.
Yeah, thank you for that, Pratibha. Before we move ahead, I would request any questions that you may have, please submit via the Q&A option that you will have on your Zoom toolbar. Thank you. Next up is one of the hot topics these days when it comes to clinical evaluation, that is post-market clinical follow-up, or PMCF. A lot of the manufacturers out there are a little wary about PMCF, especially when it comes to legacy devices that have been on the market for decades or are low-risk devices. Pratibha, I know this is very close to your heart and you can go on and on about this topic. So we'd like to hear from you today on your thoughts about PMCF observations and what our approach should be to address these.
Yeah, that is correct. And if I do go on and on, please stop me in the interest of time. But
Will do.
I know that well, this topic deserves a a webinar of its own. Interestingly, the most common observation that we're still seeing across different clinical evaluation reports is that a PMCF plan has not been provided without any further explanation, just that it was expected and it's not there. So it has become fairly obvious, now in our experience that it is expected that the manufacturer will have a PMCF strategy for their products and a plan documenting that strategy, and that will be shared along with the CR when it is submitted for review. Of course, the hesitation is for products that have been around for a long time, or products that have, from our perspective or from the manufacturer's perspective, little to no risk. And why do we still need to have these procedures in place? It is definitely required, or there has to be a very, very strong justification for why it is not applicable to your product. And unless it is a very low risk product with little to no interaction with the human body and many other factors that can be utilized to create a justification, I would say we should assume that it is applicable. In situations where the PMCF plan has been submitted, some of the gaps that have been noticed by the notified body and called as non-conformances are that the objectives of the PMCF activity have not been clearly defined. Okay, let me take a step back and mention that all PMCF activities do not necessarily have to be a clinical study. There are other aspects to it, other methodologies that can be followed, which we turn for guidance to PMCF guidance provided by MDCG, which is 2020-7 and 2020-8, which also has the templates necessary for creating the plan and report. These activities have to be considered and included in your PMCF plan if it is deemed as something that is applicable to your device, keeping in mind the device type and the risk category, etc. The objectives have to be very specific. Usually that is determined by the outcome of your CER. If it is to collect data on a specific risk, or one indication out of many of your product that does not have any clinical data to support it, or if it's an implant or other devices that need to be followed up for a long term, you may not have data long term pre-market, so there could be a PMCF activity designed around collecting data for a longer time period. The other gaps are usually related to the methodology. It's not very clearly explained, or things such as what would be the timeline of this activity, what would be the sample size, which should be determined statistically to justify the sample size for satisfactorily collecting the data that would support the objectives, or having statistical data or a plan for analyzing the data when you have it with you for presenting it in the PMCF report. Those are generally gaps that we have seen in a PMCF plan. Like I said, I could go on and on, but I think in conclusion, what I would like to say is PMCF is not an optional requirement, which, believe it or not, is a statement that we saw directly in an observation from the notified body for a product which most of us would assume that it is not required. So consider it for your product, for all your products, and only assume that it is not applicable if you have sufficient justification for it.
Yeah, rightly said. This brings us to the key takeaways from our webinar today. These are, of course, based on our experience, some of the steps that you can take to minimize these observations or to address such observations. So, have a detailed device information for the devices in scope, including accessories and software if applicable. Demonstrate equivalence as per MDCG 2025 and provide evidence that the differences in any of the characteristics listed here are not significant. Define the nature, extent, probability, and duration of benefit to patients and associated measurable objectives for device safety and performance. Determine acceptance criteria for safety and performance from state of the art. Have a comprehensive literature search protocol and detailed literature search and review output in your CER. Make sure you align all your documentation with the clinically relevant risk identified in the CER. And finally, establish a PMCF strategy for your devices. A PMCF plan will likely be required along with your CER. With this, we've wrapped up our webinar for today and we'll move to answering any questions that the attendees may have. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. If we're unable to take up all of your questions today, we will make a note of it and reach out to you via email. Right, so talking about the questions, I can see some interesting questions that have come up. So let me take the first one here. Alpa, why don't you go ahead and answer this? The first question goes out to you. Do we always need clinical data? What about Article 6110? Alpa, are you there on the line?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I was on mute.
No worries.
Yeah. So according to MDCG 2026 Article 6110, generally that doesn't apply to high-risk device. However, the low-risk device, they may be an exemptions, but it depends on certain parameters such as the device type or risk classification, level of interaction with the human body, and also the results of manufacturer's risk management. So it is important to note that lack of any clinical data or no articles from literature search or even device being on the market for a long time are not sufficient justifications for Article 6110 being accepted by notified bodies. So it's pretty important to have a sufficient evidence to support safety and performance of the medical devices.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's see what other interesting questions have come up. I think Pratibha, you can take this one up. So this is a long one. I'll just read it out first. So in terms of clinical benefits, they should only be with regards to patients. For example, for a tool or an instrument used by the end user that has no direct contact with the patient and no direct benefits or risks, do we still have to mention this in relation to the patient? Or this is applicable only if we are claiming a clinical benefit?
I think the attendee has answered this towards the end of the question. It is applicable if you are claiming a clinical benefit, which would be the case for most of the devices. If in the example that you've mentioned, a tool or a hand instrument that has no contact with the patient, if you can if you can present in the CR that there are no benefits, or I don't think we can say that there are no risks, but we can say that there are no benefits other than that the device performs its intended purpose and facilitates the procedure, and then present data to support your intended performance for the device. So for certain class 1 devices, for devices like I mentioned before that have no contact directly, or for example, if you have a hand instrument or parts of the dental treatment unit that don't really contact the patient, or such ancillary devices, you can take that route.
All right. Thank you for that, Pratibha. We also have another question that is on the same topic. So, should the claims or clinical benefits section only include claims in technical or marketing materials, or should they also include any claim that comes up, example, clinical benefit, that is identified during the clinical evaluation?
I think that the question is that other than the claims that come from the marketing materials, should the CR also address benefits that come up from the in the process of clinical evaluation? Well, separating out claims and clinical benefits.
Actually, sorry to interrupt. The question being, I'll just repeat it. Should the claims coming in from your technical or marketing materials, are they suffice in as part of your claims, or any claims that have been identified as part of your clinical evaluation, do we have to include those as well?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. To understand claims and clinical benefits separately, a claim is only what you claim as a manufacturer that your device does or achieves. So that is a claim that would be there on your information material, either the website or the IFU or the labeling or anything that would go to the end user as a claim of the safety or performance of your device. The examples that I gave before was a competitor claim, it's better than ABC, or it could be directly related to performance. It reduces the procedure time, or does this better, or that does that better, or it could be related to safety. It's 50% safer than its alternatives. So that is a claim that you are making. We won't necessarily find claims from data being evaluated in the CER. Benefits, yes, benefits could be from that device type in general, or the procedure in which the device is used in general. There could be a clinical benefit from there. So if you do find such a benefit from the data that you have evaluated, you can ascribe it to your device, provided you have data from your device or equivalent device to support it, if it is a direct benefit. If it is an indirect benefit, then it can also come, the supporting data can also be based from the state-of-the-art data on similar devices or similar technology as such.
Right. Thank you for that. If we want to switch it up, because we have further questions coming in on benefits, that's great. Let's pick a question on literature. What if my literature evidence does not specifically report on the endpoints identified? What do we do then?
That's a great question. I think we do find ourselves in that situation more often than we like. And we can utilize what are referred to as surrogate endpoints in this situation. If you don't have endpoints directly related to your device from literature data, you can consider endpoints from that could be considered as indirectly related to your device. For example, if your device is an etchant that is used in a restorative procedure, and you don't necessarily have articles that specifically evaluate performance of the etchant, if you have data on the entire restorative system overall, or on the restoration overall, you can present that as indirect evidence of the success of the restoration where your etchant has been used, provided the other materials used are materials that are compatible with your etchant. So that is one example. There could be other ways to determine surrogate endpoints. Again, all of this is very well explained in the guidances that I mentioned before.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Going back to clinical benefits again, when it comes to devices with which have no clinical benefits, example, class 2A surgical instruments, how would we go about presenting the clinical benefits and measurable objectives, and how to establish performance endpoints?
You will see a lot of questions around clinical benefits. I think it's quite confusing for us. I think this is also related to the first question or the second question that we discussed before. You may have devices that are ancillary to a procedure or to the entire, treatment or management of the patient or diagnosis of the patient. You may determine that there is no specific benefit from the device other than the fact that it is serving as intended performance. I would like to mention that usually it is expected that you would define a benefit from a device. Otherwise, the question that the notified body usually asks is, if your device is serving, is providing no benefit to the patient, then why should it be on the market? Why should it be, available for use in the market? So I think if you can answer that question satisfactorily, that's how you should derive benefits. But for a device, if there is nothing specific as such for certain class 1 instruments, even I would go ahead to say maybe certain 2A risk devices as well, then you would have to define benefits for those. Otherwise, just go about presenting data around your intended performance of the device and establish that it is being used as intended. Also, sorry, there's a second there was a second part to the question about there was a second part of the question about performance endpoints. The best way to find that out is from literature, in my experience. When you look at certain studies, when you look at certain articles where, if not your device specifically, if similar devices have been used, you can look at what kind of endpoints have been determined for such a device to conclude from the study that the device has good or acceptable performance.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we do have time for one last question on your favorite topic, Pratibha, which is PMCF. For a general PMCF survey, how do you define the sample size statistically if you're not looking directly at clinical endpoints? Very interesting.
Yes, that is interesting. It's if you're well, first of all, what I should say is that it will be expected that if you are conducting a PMCF activity, your survey has questions specific to performance or safety or whatever your objective of the activity is. If you are determining a general PMCF survey, the sample size, or in either case, the sample size would have to be determined by what the objectives of your study are. Usually when there are, when you have specific objectives, it is required that the sample size considers that. It can also come from the PMS data. What is the kind of sales that you have for your device? For example, there could be devices that are, there are not many sales for those products, but they are essential. There can be medical devices like that, so that could be one consideration. And most importantly, the type of the device and the risk of the device would be consideration when determining the sample size. Involve a biostatistician in the process is what I would like to recommend.
Yeah, I agree. So in the interest of time, I would like to mention that questions that did not get answered in today's session, we will write to you via email with a response. And also, just as a closing statement, again, I would like to reiterate that a copy of the recording will be shared with the registered attendees upon completion of the webinar. For any further information or to schedule a CAPTIS demo, you can reach out to us at info@celegence.com. That's all from us today. Thank you for joining. Have a good day.